Today you join me in sweltering hot Austin, Texas for our first ride on both the CanAm Origin and the CanAm Pulse, and let's start out with that CanAm Pulse. Now, if you haven't seen these motorcycles yet, what they are two electric motorcycles built off the same platform, one called the Origin, which is an off-road variant, and the other called the Pulse, which is a more on-road version. And if you want to know all of the specs and a deep dive into all the numbers, then you can check out the news video that we have linked below that we made when this bike first came out. But in this video, it's our first chance to ride it, so we want to get them out on the street and see how they are. Stepping onto this Pulse, it's pretty cool. When you switch on the bike, you feel some fans kick on, so it does give you an indication that you're switching the bike on, which is pretty neat. You roll the throttle forward, it'll get rid of that little menu, and then everything that you need to do to get this bike running is pretty clearly explained here on the screen, because obviously there's no motor to kick on. So you need maybe some indication of, hey, I'm twisting the throttle, why is it not going? Stop switch. So you go stop switch. It does beep at you to let you know now the bike is on, so if I twist the throttle, it is going to move. Also, for navigating between your modes, we've got a button right here that pulls up this little side screen. Then I can use this toggle to go in between my regen settings. If I press it again, that's the passive regen. So the first one was the active regen when I roll the throttle forward. So I can also go over to my drive mode, Sport Plus, Normal, Rain, and Eco. I'll start out in Normal, see how it feels. And then I also have my traction control settings. Yeah, you also have this button to navigate between some of your different options here on the screen. So if I go to statistics, then it'll pull up my speed, how long I've been riding, how far I've ridden, my power consumption, but I still have some of my gauges going here. I can also pull up my media. If I hook up my phone, you can have Apple CarPlay going, all of that, which is pretty cool. But then if you do a long press on this button, it always brings you back to your gauges, so you can either cycle around, or if you just need to get back to your gauges, hold it down and you're there. Now, this bit of a hum that the bike has when you switch it on is apparently a function of the cooling, more so than necessarily an idle to indicate to you that the bike is running. So I'm not sure that it does it all the time. I'll see if it switches off at any point during our ride today, but what I'll say is that it's 9 a.m. here in Austin, Texas, and it's already 86 degrees. So maybe it switches off in the cold, but I'm not sure we're going to get those conditions today. There is a little bit of a hard spot on the side of the seat, so sometimes sitting for a while with your feet down can get to be a little uncomfortable. And already I can tell you the bike is genuinely very, very quiet. Some of the other electric motorcycles that are out there, you can hear a little bit of noise from the chain and from other systems on the bike, but so far not noticing any of that on this, partly probably because of the chain case system that they have on this bike that is sealed. So it is pretty silent. Genuinely, there is a little bit of a hum to the inverter, but otherwise very quiet. Now, I am interested to try out the regen on this bike. When you push forward on the throttle, it slows you down further, which is pretty cool. So if you want a little extra braking, but you want to do it efficiently, i.e. recuperating power while you're doing it, then you can roll forward on the throttle and it slows you down. Not super dramatically in my current setting, but I could bring it up to max and then it would do more. So that's pretty sweet. I want to also try switching over to Sport Plus there. Oh, yeah, even just a quick blip of the throttle, it's got some push. So 47 horsepower doesn't sound like a whole lot, but the thing with both this electric motorcycle and really any motorcycle out there with an electric powertrain, you're going to notice that they'll feel quite a bit quicker than on paper you would think, because all that power is instant and it comes with a huge wave of torque. So yeah, if I want to boogie on this bike, it can get out of its way. I think in a lot of ways this is a motorcycle that could be good for beginners, because you don't have the barrier to entry that is learning how to use a clutch, if that is a barrier to entry for you. But I will caution you, this bike has obviously ABS, it's got traction control, it's got rider aids and those kind of systems to help make things safer. But if you put it into Sport Plus mode and you go traction control off, you could for sure get into trouble on this bike because it's got plenty of power. The other nice thing for today here in Austin, Texas is that as hot as it's going to get, we won't have a running motor under us. So hopefully that should help us stay a little bit cooler, because if it's almost 90 degrees at 9 a.m., can only imagine what the rest of our day is going to be like. Here you can see some of the bikes set here charging in between one of our stops. And let's do a little overview here of the Pulse. So you're going to have the same basic architecture as the Origin, but you're not going to have as much suspension travel. It's also obviously going to be a very different wheel tire package. So we have full-on SportMax street tires here from Dunlop, 17-inch wheels front and rear. And this bike is also going to look and feel in a lot of ways smaller. It is a little bit lighter at 390 pounds versus 412, but again, you've got the same basic underpinnings here. Also KYB suspension, just like on the Origin. And then you will have a little bit of extra storage, 1.7 liters, as opposed to 0.7 liters that's up there in the front. Here on the Origin, we can see an example that has a little bit of accessorizing done to it. So we've got these protective bars around the bodywork, as well as fog lights here, very similar to the fog lights that were on the Pulse that I've been riding on the street. And for suspension on this bike, we have these KYB front forks, inverted, about 10 inches of travel on this bike. There's adjustability in the suspension as well. And then we have a pretty aggressive Dunlop tire in the rear. I'm actually surprised at how aggressive they went. 18-inch rear wheel and a 21-inch front wheel. Single brake disc in the front, just like on the Pulse. Here they have a full cutout of the powertrain. So this is essentially the bike minus the wheels, some of the suspension, bodywork, seat, and some of the other electronics. So you've got the battery pack here in the center, and as you can see, this is actually tied into the rear suspension, so it is a structural component, and that, they say, helps them keep the weight down a little bit. This particular display is from an Origin, not a Pulse. There's a few differences. Here's the cooling system in the front, split radiators. You can see the foot pegs, again, tied into this whole structure here, and then the Rotax powertrain with the chain case behind it. So it's pretty cool to get a visual of what the basic structure of this bike looks like. This, more or less, is the basis that either one of the bikes is built off. Now, I think it's important to talk about who this motorcycle does work for and who this motorcycle doesn't work for, because there were a lot of comments of mixed feelings on our initial video that we did when they revealed this bike. So people that this motorcycle doesn't work for, let's talk about that. If your typical ride is on a Saturday, you're going for a canyon ride, 100, 150, 200 miles, then this is probably not going to be the ideal bike for that, because range is definitely going to be a factor. So this bike, they rate at a combined 80 miles of range. That's going to go up if you're riding mostly slower speeds in the city, and that number is going to go down if you're riding a lot of highway. And then on the off-road version, the Origin, it's more like 71 miles combined, and same thing, it'll go up or down depending on how you ride. So it's not to say that it's impossible to do a big canyon ride. It's possible, but the range and charging is going to start becoming a hindrance with that kind of riding. I think the other situation in which you would have a hard time with one of these bikes, and it would maybe be more along the lines of the use case for the Origin, would be if you like to do cross-country adventure trips, you want to ride from New York to California. Again, those kind of distances, the range is going to become a hindrance, as is the charging. Yes, it is possible, but is it going to be ideal? Probably not. Now, situations where this motorcycle, I think, does work is as a commuter bike. So if you are doing more than 50 or 60 miles in your day-to-day commute during the week to get to work and to get to the gym and to go by the grocery store, I'd be surprised. So I think this motorcycle could work really well in that situation as an around town bike, as something to do your daily commute. 100% you could use this for that. And for that reason, I think that the Pulse makes more sense. Because of the range, I would just lean toward having one of these things as a commuter rather than an adventure bike to go really far on. Then again, some people maybe live out in the country or out in the mountains. They have some dirt roads around them, some little trails that are immediately around their house, in which case then the Origin could be a lot of fun, or as a bike to ride 10-15 miles to your nearest town over some rougher roads. Sure, or if you like to commute on a taller bike with more suspension travel, you could throw a slightly more street-oriented tire on that Origin and use that one as a commuter bike instead. I've also got to mention charging on these bikes. When you go to fill them up, if you have a level 2 charger, which I highly recommend getting because it's not a huge deal to get yourself into a level 2 charger, then you can go from 20 to 80% battery in about 50 minutes. Another feature on these bikes is this link system for adding accessories. You can do that up front here. You can add some extra storage up here to expand that. You can also add some bags on the side with that same link system, and then both the Origin and the Pulse you can set up to have a rider on the rear if you want that passenger seat. There's the attachment point if you want to put one of the soft bags to expand your storage here in front of the seat. Now, a few of these features do come from the Ski-Doo side of things for BRP from the snowmobile background. This link system is similar to one that exists over there. And then this chain case as well. This is very similar to a system that they use on their Ski-Doo products, but in this application it's probably under even less load, and the maintenance as such is pretty minimal. So your initial service on this is going to be 5,000 miles, and then after that you'll have the oil change every 10,000 miles, and at 25,000 miles they'll check out the tensioner in here, but that makes this a pretty low maintenance system. Now, I also want to say a quick thanks to our friends over at Rider Justice. They've been supporting our channel basically since day one. So if you ever need legal representation, either on 2 wheels or 4, make sure you call Scott first. Now I have a chance to try out the Origin off-road a little bit. We've just got some light gravel roads that we can run on here. It'll be interesting to see what all we get into, but I have a chance to get a feel for the suspension. Obviously traction, a lot of that is going to come down to what tires you have, but the anti-squat that you get with this Rotax powertrain is one of the really cool aspects of it. Gives you quite a bit of traction when you do go for the throttle. So that plus all of the different modes that you can select on this, off-road, off-road plus, of course, ABS, traction control, all of that, and regen is adjustable. The other nice thing about this bike in an off-road setting is that you don't have a whole lot to think about since it is just twist and go, which makes it a pretty easy bike to ride if you're newer to off-roading. And it is going to be one less thing for you to think about as you traverse this kind of terrain, which is very loose, by the way. Pretty maneuverable bike as well. Got some tighter turns, pretty easy to control it, balance it. Oh, I love the way that this bike flows over bumps. It really does not feel super heavy when you're moving. Feels really good. Yeah, I like it. They chose a good tire for what we're doing today, that's for sure. So this is pretty cool too. If you hold down on your start button here, you can go into a reverse mode. You push forward on your throttle and it can help you back the bike up. Not that these are super heavy, but since it's electric, that's something that's easy for them to do. It's just a nice feature to have. Now I get to spend a little bit of time with the Origin on road, and so far it feels obviously like a very similar bike. The powertrain feels exactly the same. It's maybe not quite as quick accelerating as the Pulse, and the other big noticeable thing is that this is definitely a taller bike, so if seat height is going to be a factor for you on either of these motorcycles, the Pulse is lower. It's about a 31-inch seat height. You can feel that this is taller, but it's still not too bad. It's a pretty narrow bike, so I wouldn't say it's difficult to get your feet down. I'm only about 5'10", and it feels pretty easy. Our bike is also still plenty quick. I'm in sport mode and it's got no problem getting up to speed. Your tires are also very different on this, as are the wheels. 17 versus an 18 rear and 21-inch front wheel that's on this bike. So it's not going to handle as well as the Pulse, but for as aggressive as these tires are, they don't feel bad here on the street. And I do like, again, having all that travel, but this bike is set up, I'd say, probably a little bit stiffer than I would have it set if it were my bike personally. But I think if you're going to get a commuter motorcycle, the Pulse for a lot of people probably makes a bit more sense because it is the more street-oriented bike and the range is a little bit better. But that being said, if 100% practicality is not your goal and you like the looks of this Origin, I don't think that there's anything wrong with getting this even to use as a primarily on-road motorcycle. Here we are, by the way, at our top speed, 79. This is partly limited to 79 so that their range rating can be a little bit better, because if they make their top speed higher, then as part of the range test they will go at a higher speed. And yeah, it's a little unfortunate, I guess, but at the same time, if you're on an 80-mile-an-hour highway, which does exist, I will grant you, your range is going to be so bad at that speed. It's really not going to be the kind of conditions you want to ride this in anyway. And for sure your acceleration peters out the closer you get to that top speed, but below 80 miles an hour, this still feels like a pretty quick bike. So that is our first impression here of these new Can-Ams, the first motorcycles that they're putting on the street in quite a long time, since I guess the 80s. Now, all in all with these bikes, they're a lot of fun to ride. They've got good performance. Yes, the range is limited, but I think the biggest killer for a lot of people is the price tag. So the Pulse is going to be the cheaper of the two. Pulse starts at $14,000. It's an extra $500 if you want to get into this Origin, and I think a lot of people will, because if nothing else, the Origin just has killer looks, especially with the knobby tires and its taller stance. Now, there's also a 73 version of these that gets you graphics, you get stripes on the wheels, some special 73 badging, and you get silver paint as opposed to either white or black. That for an extra $2,000, and that's true, that's the same price bump on either the Pulse or the Origin. I would not go that route because it is purely visual, and I think you'd kind of have to be a bit of an enthusiast to notice, because the color even is not dramatically different. So I'd save the money, get one of these standard models if you are going to go this route. And again, I think one of these bikes can make sense if you don't necessarily have super far to go, if you are a fan of EVs and you're not super price conscious. If not, and maybe you're a little bit more in the vein that I would be with my own buying decisions, then looking out for one of these, if you're curious, in a couple years on the used market, might make them that much more attainable once the prices have dropped a little bit. But if nothing else, these are really fun bikes, cool. If you ever get an opportunity to ride one, I recommend it, because they are a blast to rip around on, especially this Origin riding off-road. And that's all for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and we'll see you in the next.